Tonight, the CDC's new guidelines for traveling for those who are fully vaccinated. Then, class of COVID. In a special edition of Cronkite News, we'll take a look at how politics, coronavirus, and education are intertwined.
Cronkite News starts now.
Good evening and welcome to Cronkite News on Arizona PBS. I'm Gabrielle Zabat. With summer just around the corner, you might be dreaming about your next vacation, and the CDC says you just might be able to take it. If you've had your COVID shots, you can travel without much worry, according to new CDC guidelines. Today, the agency updated its guidance for travel for people who have been fully vaccinated. The CDC considers those to be low-risk travelers during the pandemic.
I mean, it is important that all travelers heed the official guidance and travel restrictions that are being put in place. Obviously, wearing your face mask, socially distancing, getting vaccinated is the best thing you can do right now.
Another important thing to note, if you are vaccinated, you don't need to quarantine after visiting a foreign country. Here in Arizona, more than 30% of our population have now been vaccinated. This comes as Arizona public health officials reported a 3-week high of 940 new coronavirus cases and 12 additional deaths. 120 of the new cases were from one lab reporting, a backlog spanning the entire pandemic. But today's update was the highest since March 12, with or without the backlog. Despite the spike, Governor Doug Ducey relaxed more COVID restrictions this week. With vaccination efforts underway, the new order provides hospitals with the flexibility to resume elective surgeries. The state can also help facilitate additional visitation as well as off-site visits for long-term care residents without the need for quarantine upon return. Churches are making changes too, just in time for Easter. Some are getting rid of their capacity limits and not requiring face coverings or social distancing. According to the CDC, if it's been 2 weeks since your last vaccine dose, you can safely gather indoors with other fully vaccinated people without wearing a mask. And this morning, the governor released this video announcing admission to all state parks will be free this weekend. Take a listen.
Arizona's parks are open. All parks, everywhere, rural and urban, from Phoenix to Tucson to Flagstaff, all towns and municipalities. Enjoy the beauty of our state safely. And to celebrate Easter, I'm waiving all entrance fees at all state parks.
Good evening, I'm Abigail Verwick, and let's take a look at your weather this upcoming Easter weekend. Looking ahead at Saturday, we have some warmer temperatures all across the state. Sedona with a high of 83, Flagstaff with a high of 71, and down here in Phoenix, we're looking at a high of 97. But what does that mean for this evening? Tonight in Phoenix, we're looking at a temperature of about 90 degrees at around 6 o'clock and sunny. We're going to have clear skies throughout the entire evening, but as that sun does set throughout the evening, it's going to cool down, but only to about a temperature of just below 80 degrees. So still a fairly warm evening, despite not having that Arizona sun. Looking at the rest of our weekend, as we move into Easter, happy Easter to everyone who is celebrating. As I said, Saturday with a high of 97 and Sunday a high of 99. That is almost in the triple digits. So I recommend starting your egg hunt a little bit earlier before it starts to really warm up. Monday, it's going to cool off just a little bit with a high of 97. And as we move into the work week, it's going to cool off just a little bit as we move into next weekend. Tuesday with a high of 93, Wednesday cooling off with a high of 91. Thursday, a high of 93, and Friday and Saturday, that high is going to drop down to just below 90 degrees. Still warm and sunny. We're looking at warm temperatures all the way through. That is your 8-day weather forecast in the Weather Center. I'm Abigail Verwick.
After the break, a Cronkite News special, Class of COVID. We'll take a look at how the pandemic is impacting education.
The reason we want to make sure that all of these kids get vaccinated is so that we can truly achieve herd immunity. We don't want to have little pockets of people who might be infectious and not be protected.
Plus, a new COVID study happening in Arizona is aimed at keeping kids safe. And a look back at the moments that brought us here. Don't go away.
Good evening and welcome to this special edition of Cronkite News, Class of COVID on Arizona PBS. I'm Jenna Delatorre.
And I'm Reed Harmon.
Tonight, we'll take an in-depth look at how the coronavirus is impacting education here in Arizona.
We'll discuss everything from vaccines to remote learning to returning to the classroom.
Let's begin with where we are today. Arizona classrooms are back open after a year of remote learning. Governor Ducey made the executive order to reopen campuses no later than March 15th. Schools that were on spring break at the time started back a week later. And as Faith Abercrombie reported, the decision caused some districts to scramble.
Our executive team and our governing board were having those conversations of what that would look like for Glendale Elementary School District. This executive order just accelerated those plans.
The Glendale Elementary School District says it was making decisions based on the numbers before the governor's order.
The Maricopa County Department of Public Health metrics, we follow those metrics. We make all of our decisions based on following those metrics. The Glendale Elementary School District has been operating in a virtual learning model.
Most districts are going to be in compliance with in-person learning.
Our leaders and teachers have been making heroic efforts throughout the pandemic to continue to provide education to our kids, and they will do so.
The Arizona Department of Education says many schools were taken by surprise at the quick deadline.
You know, we would have preferred that there was a little more time and notice for schools so that they could have adjusted their plans more proactively.
If there is another significant outbreak of COVID-19 in these schools, Ducey's order goes on to say that schools may only close down with approval from the Arizona Department of Health Services.
Many of us are familiar with the idea of students receiving grades, an A for mastery of a subject and an F for little to no understanding. But schools get graded too. It's based on Arizona merit tests as well as other assessments. The results for this year's tests won't impact the schools, but Governor Ducey is asking schools to keep the results for future reference.
I think that's a brilliant idea because it would be nice to get a perspective on the impact that the pandemic and virtual learning has had on the learning and the kids' ability to be successful or not in this school year.
AZM2 testing starts this month, with results expected by November.
While schools and teachers have done their best to help students transition to school from behind a screen, data shows students have fallen behind significantly since the start of the pandemic. This has sparked conversations among students, parents, and administrators. How do we get them back on track? Over the past year, students across the nation have had to adjust to remote learning. Here in Arizona, some students have been out of the physical classroom for almost a year now. And according to Governor Doug Ducey, the students' grades show the damaging impact the pandemic has had.
I don't mean to sound dramatic, but this has been, for everyone, such a hard year.
Dawn Schmidt is a high school history teacher who has been teaching her students virtually. Schmidt says she's done everything she can to help students during this time, but is still fearful of where students may stand academically after the pandemic.
Until we have an actual benchmark to see, or a baseline to see, okay, where are these kids? What do we actually need to do for them? Then that's going to be another story.
Expect more. Arizona Senior Vice President and Chief Impact Officer Aaron Hart has been working with education administrators and students across the state and feels that with statewide testing, schools will be able to get a more accurate idea as to what their students need.
That's going to give us our first indication at a statewide level of how our students are doing, where those learning gaps are.
The AZM2, previously known as the Arizona Merit Test, will be administered to 3rd through 10th graders. The testing will begin in April, according to an executive order signed by Governor Doug Ducey. From there, Ducey hopes that the data collected will be helpful in constructing further plans to best help the individual student get back on track with their academics.
There are lots of options that they can consider for how to best, help students catch up. Summer school is one of those options. Other options might be like additional tutoring or one-on-one interventions or bringing in an additional staff to help. I guess the point is there are a lot of different options that schools could consider. And I think it's best left up to schools and school districts to make those decisions because they know their students best. Even if we did summer school, which could be a great solution for many schools and students, there will likely need to be continued interventions and supports provided to students so that they can get back on grade level. So, this might even take a couple of years for students to really get back on track.
Schmidt is hopeful that with the proper resources and help, students will get back on track both inside the classroom and mentally.
The other piece of this is I think sometimes we forget that even in this crazy world, kids have learned other skills that aren't measurable by tests.
The Arizona Department of Education is working with school districts on how to safely bring students in to administer those tests. The testing window has also been expanded from 4 weeks to 6 weeks to better accommodate students.
Another recent development, vaccine eligibility changed. People 16 years and older are now allowed to receive the COVID-19 vaccine in all 50 states. Also, a new FCC-approved formula of the Pfizer vaccine has undergone trial and was proven to be 100% effective in kids ages 12 to 15. It will hopefully be available later this year. Drug maker Moderna also announced last month that Phoenix will be one of the cities where it will begin clinical trials of its COVID-19 vaccine on children, with subjects ranging in age from 6 months up to 12 years old. Jake Holter has the details from our Washington bureau.
Moderna got approval to use its 2-dose COVID vaccine on adults in December, and it has already started tests of the drug on teens. These latest trials will test different vaccine doses to see what works on the youngest of children.
So the adult dose for the Moderna is 100 micrograms, but they are starting with 25 micrograms, and then basically watching kids to see how they react.
Dr. Shad Marvasti, Director of Public Health and Prevention at the University of Arizona College of Medicine, says dosages will likely be adjusted from there to find the most effective levels.
If that looks good and there's no major issues, then they will have a group of the kids in the study have 50 micrograms. And then if that looks okay, they'll have another group that has 100 micrograms.
Marvasti, who is not working on the Moderna trial, said it will likely take several weeks for all the pieces to fall into place. But organizers of the Phoenix trial say that hasn't kept parents from flooding them with hundreds of calls asking if their kids might be eligible. Even though kids are at a much lower risk from COVID-19, the director of the American Public Health Association says there are several good reasons to get them vaccinated.
The reason we want to make sure that all of these kids get vaccinated is so that we can truly achieve herd immunity. We don't want to have little pockets of people who might be infectious and not be protected.
The first phase of this trial will include 750 children, and later trials with adjusted doses of the vaccine will include some kids getting a placebo. Ultimately, this trial will include 6,750 children in 75 cities. Moderna, along with Marvasti and Benjamin, say the trials are safe for kids. Marvasti says Moderna's trust that the vaccine is safe enough to begin trials on kids could have an added benefit, helping to quell vaccine hesitancy among other groups.
Hopefully, depending on the results, it will help give people more confidence to get the vaccine, especially if it proves to be as safe and effective in children as it has been in adults.
And Benjamin says that if these trials lead to the right vaccine protocols for children, they will not only protect everyone from transmission, but will help kids return to normal.
Getting kids vaccinated, I think, will certainly improve their quality of life and their ability to really interact effectively with their friends.
In Washington, Jake Holter, Cronkite News.
This week, the White House reports that 73% of seniors and 36% of adults have their first doses of the COVID-19 vaccination, and just around 15% of the country is fully vaccinated. As for teachers specifically, they've been able to get the vaccine for months, but they're not being required to. The CDC recently relaxed classroom restrictions as well, saying 3 feet of distance is safe for kids wearing masks.
Needless to say, school officials and students continue to adapt in many ways to make sure learning continues throughout the pandemic.
It cannot be overstated how much teachers and administrators have gone through to make sure kids never lose the opportunity to grow. But sadly, for some teachers, the stress simply became too much. The pandemic led to an exodus of school teachers in the state. According to a recent study, more than a third of teachers who left their jobs in 2020 did so because of the COVID-19 outbreak. Tina Giuliano takes us back and shows us why many educators bolted.
Arizona schools have always struggled with a teacher shortage, but the coronavirus pandemic has made it worse, according to an annual survey by the Arizona School Personnel Administrators Association.
And if you saw in our results, over 300 teachers resigned or decided to retire with the primary reason of COVID.
Past president of the Arizona School Personnel Administrators Association, Justin Wing, said that when schools opened this fall, 28% of teacher positions were vacant, up from last year's 21%. Wing says that of the 751 teachers who quit, 326 cited coronavirus as the primary reason for leaving. Another 138 took an unpaid leave of absence because of the virus. It's the same in Tucson, says Pima Unified School District Superintendent Sean Rickert.
I've got about 3 teachers that have already said at the end of this year that they're done.
While teachers often complain about the workload, that's just part of the reason some gave for stepping away this year.
I don't think it's 100% related to the workload. It is definitely COVID related.
One problem is the new demands teachers face in the COVID era.
Significantly more challenging to teach in a remote environment.
For other teachers, like Tempe teacher Beth Lewis, health concerns play a part.
I have other friends who have quit over it, and they're amazing teachers, but they have health conditions and their families have health conditions.
The pandemic adds to a problem that Arizona schools have long grappled with: money.
Are you going to go to Texas where you can make $60,000, or are you going to Arizona where you can make $40,000?
As in years past, Arizona schools have filled about half of the vacancies with teachers who are not certified. Wing said there are those still interested in teaching, but fewer are making a long-term career out of it.
But ultimately, that still doesn't give us that pool where we have kiddos going to college ed, graduating early 20s, and making teaching a 30-year profession.
Lewis said teachers have to be safe for themselves and for their families. In Washington, Tina Giuliano, Cronkite News.
Thankfully, some schools were able to get some relief with the help of funding from the CARES Act. Some schools used the financial assistance to provide better cleaning and PPE to teachers and staff. For districts like Paradise Valley, they said they already had the tools to help with online learning, so providing cleaner areas was their priority. But not all districts could focus on that and had to spend money elsewhere.
We bought 400 Chromebooks, along with some carts to go along with those that we can get out to families. We purchased hotspots. There's a good portion of our district that doesn't have access to reliable internet.
Last month, President Biden announced an additional $81 billion from American Rescue Plan funds would be allocated to make sure schools are able to move forward safely.
On the local level, Arizona looked for more funding for public schools from an additional tax imposed on those who earn more than $250,000 a year. Cronkite News' Tyler Manning explored the concerns and hopes before it was passed.
When we're talking about kids, every single dollar counts.
Experts on both sides of the issue agree the state needs to invest in education. The divide comes in when discussing Prop 208's effect on Arizona. Chad Heinrich, the state's NFIB director, points to potential effects on small business.
It's clear that the drafters of the initiative have never signed the front of a paycheck, because to think otherwise would mean that they were trying to take a direct assault against Arizona's small business economy, and I don't believe that that's their intention, but it is the result.
David Lujan, who supports Prop 208 and is the director of the Arizona Center for Economic Progress, says the tax won't affect most entrepreneurs in the state.
Prop 208 only taxes the wealthiest 1% of Arizona taxpayers. And so most small business owners are saying that they make nowhere near the taxable income to hit the thresholds by Prop 208.
The U.S. Small Business Administration reported that in 2016, the median salary for self-employed Arizonans with incorporated businesses was around $48,000. That means that if this 1 grain of rice represents $1,000, the average compares to the $250,000 threshold like this. That does not mean the rest of the economy won't be impacted, though.
I think there will be a dramatic impact on taxpayer behavior as a result of imposing these high tax rates on a handful of people.
Hoffman said that an estimated 40% of the people who will pay this tax are 60 or older, meaning they have likely come to Arizona to retire and would be willing to move out of the Grand Canyon state if their taxes increased.
As those millionaires leave, we're not just losing the Red for Ed taxes, we're losing the state's general fund revenue as they move as well.
Hoffman went on to say the proposition is a missed opportunity, and he wishes Arizona could have found another way to get education funding. But Carrie Wolf says something had to be done.
When it came down to it, we decided, you know what, if the legislatures, if Governor Ducey aren't going to provide that funding, then we're going to make sure we get it for our kids, because my students deserve the very best education possible.
The future of the bill is still shaky, though. The proposition has experienced legal challenges since being passed. The Arizona Supreme Court are set to hear arguments on the case on April 20th.
Coming up next on Cronkite News, we'll take a look at how masks and social distancing affected those who are hard of hearing. Don't go away.
The weather around Phoenix is just beautiful today. Let's take a look at the weather around the valley.
Thank you for joining us for the special edition of Cronkite News. Here are the top stories that we're tracking today at noon.
Some of the best players for their program.
Here we go, lights up. Whoa.
As artists, we conduct our educations in public. You can never know whether it's going to be a success. One just has to risk it.
It's you and the work and the place. It's a very particular relationship.
Here's our lens. Tell us what you think.
Friday night at 9 on Arizona PBS.
Welcome back to this special edition of Cronkite News, Class of COVID. Prior to the CARES Act, when the pandemic began, students on the Navajo Nation faced a digital divide. At the time, only about a quarter of households on the reservation had broadband internet, which made it harder for those students to submit their online assignments on time. One father of two school-aged daughters had this to say.
In class with classmates. And sometimes our internet will go down and they're stuck without going to school for a day or so.
To combat this issue across the reservation, Pinyon Unified School District used a fleet of Wi-Fi buses 3 to 4 times a week.
By now, wearing a mask has become a habit for most of us. While you may miss smiling at the stranger who holds the door for you or at the worker who helps you at the store, the hard of hearing community is missing out on more than just our friendly faces. For roughly the 1.1 million Arizonans that make up 15% of the state's hard of hearing population, normal face masks make it harder to see visual and facial expressions, read lips, and engage in conversation. So the Arizona Commission for the Deaf and Hard of Hearing discovered wearing clear face masks solves that problem while keeping people safe. That's why the ACDHH started a clear mask program where schools can fill out a form on their website to request the masks. Having sign language interpreters on site for schools and government announcements has also been very helpful during the pandemic.
Sometimes when people talk quietly, it's kind of hard for us to hear. So we have to say, can you please speak up? And sometimes they don't want to, but they need to in order for us to hear.
As of now, schools are planning to keep social distancing and mask mandate measures in place despite Governor Ducey's recent executive order.
The pandemic has also had a devastating effect on students' mental health, with a major increase in depression and anxiety rates in young athletes. I had the chance to take a deeper dive into this startling statistic. 68%. That is the percentage of high school athletes who reported signs of depression in the midst of the pandemic. This metric is from a study done by the Department of Orthopedics and Rehabilitation at the University of Wisconsin. That number is twice what it was prior to COVID-19.
The mental health of our kids have been an increasing concern every week, every month that we have not been able to get back to some type of normalcy.
On one hand, you have the isolation. On the other, you have this sense of doom and dread with everything going on around us, especially when infection rates are really high.
Now, sports are back. Or are they? That's a question these players have been asking for the past 6 months. It has been the mental battle of whether they will be here or here.
Just so many highs and lows and what's going on and what's not. And, one day we're playing and one day we're maybe playing, then maybe we're not, then maybe we are. And now we're playing with a maybe.
You guys need to know how to install.
According to that same Wisconsin study, physical activity has hit a new low for high school athletes. In fact, since COVID-19 has surfaced, activities have decreased by 50%, while anxiety has increased by 65%. Stagnancy is unforgiving, whether it be mentally or physically.
This is like dealing with a major injury where you haven't been able to do anything for 5 months.
With limited practice time, team bonding mainly consists of turning on a camera and seeing a 1-inch box of each teammate. When teams get the green light to return to the field, the green light on the camera will finally be turned off.
Not being able to be there for them, is tough. I mean, I'm there for them, but not completely understanding, what they're going through.
In the meantime, practices will continue, but uncertainty remains the same. Now, a year later and slowly returning to a new normal, spring sports are in session and in person. Last month, the Arizona Interscholastic Association ruled that athletes don't have to wear masks during active gameplay, but coaches and athletes must wear masks when on the sidelines. Other health and safety protocols are also currently in place to protect fans and parents at athletic events. That does it for this special edition of Cronkite News Class of COVID. I'm Reed Harmon.
And I'm Jenna Delatorre. Thank you so much for joining us. We'd like to keep this conversation going, so let us know what you think. How has the pandemic impacted Arizona students in their education? Just go to our Cronkite News Facebook and Twitter pages to weigh in.
And for more top Arizona stories anytime, go to cronkitenews.azpbs.org.